Mussolini. After returning from World War I, Benito Mussolini believed the Italian government had failed. In 1919, he started a movement called the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, which began with only about 200 members. Mussolini rejected democracy and said that the country should be ruled by a strong elite. He called for a strict, military-style society and promoted the idea of spazio vitale, meaning that Italy needed to expand into nearby lands in order to survive and grow. He also supported colonizing Africa, claiming that high birth rates in places like Libya and Asia were a threat to civilization, even though, for him, Italy's overpopulation wasn't a problem. It was just a reason to take more territory. Many of his followers were World War I veterans who joined violent groups called Blackshirts. These Blackshirts attacked leftists and protesters in the streets, often without being stopped by the police. In 1921, Mussolini turned his movement into a political party, the National Fascist Party, and was elected to parliament. But his most dramatic move came in October 1922, when around 30,000 Blackshirts marched toward Rome to demand power. The prime minister wanted to declare martial law, which is basically military control over the country, but King Victor Emmanuel III refused. He handed power to Mussolini, thinking Mussolini could help bring stability. But the king had underestimated Mussolini. Once in power, Mussolini moved quickly. He gave legal status to his fascist militia, weakened labor unions, and passed laws that helped the rich. In 1923, he introduced the Acerbo Law, which gave a huge advantage in elections to any party that got at least 25% of the vote. Thanks to this, his alliance won the 1924 election with 64% of the vote. When socialist politician Giacomo Matteotti accused the fascists of cheating in the election, he was kidnapped and killed. The murder caused public outrage, and the opposition parties walked out of parliament in protest. But Mussolini used this to his advantage. With no opposition present, he tightened his grip on power and turned Italy into a full-blown dictatorship. On January 3, 1925, Mussolini gave a speech saying he took moral responsibility for Matteotti's murder, and basically made it clear that democracy was over. Local governments were removed, other political parties were banned, and the media was strictly controlled. Teachers had to swear loyalty to fascism, and even journalists needed government approval. A secret police force was also created to silence anyone who disagreed. Fidel Castro. In the late 1940s, Fidel Castro became active in student protests against U.S. influence, inequality, and corruption in Cuba. He later adopted Marxist ideas and came to believe that capitalism was the root of the country's problems. His real rise to power, however, began when Cuba's democracy suddenly ended. In 1952, while running for office with the Orthodox Party, Castro saw his campaign collapse after General Fulgencio Batista took power in a military coup. Batista canceled the elections and set up a dictatorship. Castro began preparing for a revolution, and he formed a secret group called the Movement, made up mostly of young working-class people from Havana. In July 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks. The plan failed. Many rebels were killed or captured, and Castro himself was sentenced to 15 years in prison. While in jail, he renamed his group the 26th of July Movement and used his famous trial speech, "History Will Absolve Me," to share his political ideas. He was then released in 1955 under an amnesty, and he went to Mexico, where he met Che Guevara and trained a new group of fighters. In December 1956, Castro and 81 others returned to Cuba on a boat called the Grama. Most were killed, but a small group, including him, Raul Castro, and Che Guevara, escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains and began a guerrilla war. Over the next 2 years, their group grew by winning support from local people and launching small attacks. At the same time, Batista's government became more hated because of censorship, violence, and corruption. And by late 1958, Castro's forces had taken control of key areas and divided the country. As U.S. pressure increased and his army began to collapse, Batista fled on New Year's Eve. In early January 1959, Castro entered Havana and was welcomed as a hero. He set up a provisional government, but quickly took full control, removed political rivals, and began turning the revolution towards socialism. By early 1959, Castro was no longer just the leader of a rebellion. He had officially become the new ruler of Cuba. That revolution was one on land. But back then, a lot of the biggest power struggles were happening at sea, especially with how powerful the U.S. Navy was. And speaking of navies, I want to give a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, World of Warships. If you haven't seen it, World of Warships is a massive multiplayer, free-to-play tactical game where you command a fleet of history's most iconic warships. The level of detail is insane. It takes the developers an average of 6 months to build each ship from historical blueprints. And in battle, things like dynamic weather effects can completely change your tactics every game. It's crazy that you can play such a detailed game for free on your PC. They're celebrating American naval history with a special 4th of July campaign and have an incredible welcome pack for new players. You can get it right now by clicking the very first link in my description and using the code STEPUP when you sign up. It hooks you up with a huge bonus: 2 free American ships, a special Stars and Stripes skin, 7 days of premium account time, 1,000,000 credits, and 500 doubloons. With a massive active community, new events dropping every week, and tons of game modes from competitive clan battles to casual co-op, you'll never run out of things to do. You can even play with the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Essex, which played a crucial role during the Cuban Missile Crisis while Castro was still in power. So click that link at the top of the description and in the pinned comment to download for free and claim your starter pack. Oh, and the game is available on consoles as well. A huge thanks again to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. Joseph Stalin. When the Bolsheviks took power in 1917, Stalin was already close to Lenin and trusted by him. He quickly supported Lenin's moves to shut down newspapers that opposed them, create the Cheka, a secret police force, and use government violence to stop anyone who resisted. Early on, Stalin was put in charge of managing the empire's many ethnic groups. In that role, he oversaw Finland's independence and guided how the Soviet Union dealt with its minority regions. During the Russian Civil War, Stalin was sent to different battle zones as a military leader. In the city of Tsaritsyn, which was later renamed Stalingrad, he acted harshly, ignoring orders, killing people he saw as enemies without trials, and burning villages to make people follow food policies. Some praised him for being strong, but others, including Lenin, criticized him for being too brutal. As Commissar for Nationalities, he also worked to bring areas like Georgia and Turkestan under Soviet control. But of course, he often clashed with local leaders. In 1922, Lenin gave Stalin what seemed like a normal job: General Secretary of the Communist Party. But Stalin used this role to quietly put his loyal supporters in key positions. Over time, this gave him a lot of hidden power. Lenin started to worry about how much power Stalin was gaining, especially after a personal argument involving Stalin insulting Lenin's wife. But Stalin was already too entrenched. In his final writings, known as his Testament, Lenin called Stalin too brutal and said he shouldn't be the leader because he was unfit for the position. He even suggested that Stalin be removed, but Stalin's allies kept the document secret. When it was finally shown to top officials, Stalin offered to step down, but no one forced him to. After Lenin died in 1924, Stalin presented himself as Lenin's most loyal follower. He organized the funeral, gave speeches about Lenin's ideas, and started building a personality cult around himself. At the same time, he pushed aside rivals like Trotsky, who many thought would take over after Lenin, by teaming up with other party leaders like Kamenev and Zinoviev. But these alliances didn't last. Once Trotsky was out of the way, Stalin turned against Kamenev and Zinoviev too. By the late 1920s, Stalin had eliminated most of his opponents. Trotsky was removed from power, sent into exile, and later expelled from the country. Kamenev and Zinoviev were forced to basically quit and lost their influence. Stalin's loyalists now controlled the government and the Communist Party. Cities were renamed after him, and he rewrote Lenin's ideas to support his own. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was studying in Paris in the 1950s, and when he came back to Cambodia, the country was in turmoil. Prince Sihanouk had ended elections and shut down parliament, and the nation was caught in civil war during the larger First Indochina War. Pol Pot collaborated with the Vietnamese-led Khmer Viet Minh rebels in the jungle, where he learned guerrilla warfare under Vietnamese control. After Cambodia gained independence in 1953, the Vietnamese agreed to leave, but Pol Pot stayed. He hoped to build a communist movement through legal politics, and he became a teacher in Phnom Penh, Cambodia's capital, while secretly helping organize the underground Communist Party. But after the 1955 elections, widely seen as rigged, Prince Sihanouk's party took full control, and any hope for peaceful change disappeared. In the early 1960s, the government began cracking down harder on dissent. When his mentor was killed, Pol Pot became the leader of the underground Cambodian Communist Party, which was still influenced by the Vietnamese. He moved back to the jungle and focused on creating a Cambodian-led revolution. Inspired by Mao Zedong's ideas, he shifted his attention from city workers to rural peasants as the heart of the movement. In 1968, the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot's movement, began a full guerrilla war. At first, they were small, but they grew quickly as government violence pushed more people to join. In 1970, a coup removed Sihanouk from power, and that's when Pol Pot made a sly move. He allied with the exiled king, gaining mass support from people loyal to Sihanouk rather than communism. At the same time, the US began bombing Cambodia to target North Vietnamese forces, but many Cambodian civilians were killed, and this pushed even more peasants to join the Khmer Rouge. Vietnam gave military help, but Pol Pot made it clear the Cambodians should lead their own revolution. By 1972, tensions between the Khmer Rouge and their Vietnamese allies had grown, as Pol Pot's group increasingly saw the Vietnamese as potential threats rather than comrades, accusing them of wanting to dominate Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge even labeled them a friend with a conflict, and began executing members who had spent time in North Vietnam or were seen as too sympathetic to them. Pol Pot had taken full control of the movement. He promoted strict discipline and radical, peasant-based policies in the areas under his control. As the Vietnamese pulled out, the Khmer Rouge became the strongest anti-government group. They began forcing villagers in the territories they controlled to give up their private land and join collective farms. Many peasants hated this policy, and some even killed their livestock to avoid handing it over to the state. Around 60,000 people fled Khmer Rouge zones as a result. In 1975, as the US-backed regime of Lon Nol fell apart, Pol Pot's forces captured Phnom Penh, and within days, they forced over 2 million people, including hospital patients, to leave the city. They said it was to protect them from bombing, but the real goal was to destroy city life, eliminate capitalism, and take total control. Mao Zedong. After the alliance between the Chinese communists and nationalists broke in 1927, Mao and a military leader named Zhu De moved to the countryside. There, they began using guerrilla warfare and building support among rural peasants. At first, the communist leadership, based in the cities and advised by the Soviet Union, saw this rural strategy as only temporary. So in 1930, the party ordered Mao to capture big cities to inspire workers to rebel. Mao believed this was a mistake, so after losing many troops, he disobeyed and returned to the countryside. In 1931, the communists set up their own government in southern China called the Yijiangxi Soviet, with Mao as its leader, and the Red Army grew quickly and defeated several nationalist attacks. But in 1934, after suffering losses to stronger nationalist forces, Mao and his troops were forced to escape. They began the Long March, a difficult, year-long retreat. During the march, however, Mao gained more respect and power, and in 1935, at a key meeting in Zunyi, he basically became the unofficial leader of the Communist Party. Soon after, in 1937, China was invaded by Japan, so nationalists and communists put aside their differences for a while and collaborated to fight against the Japanese. During the war with Japan, Mao used guerrilla tactics and gained strong support from rural peasants by combining patriotic resistance with promises to give them land. At the same time, he tightened his control over the Communist Party through campaigns like the Rectification Campaign of 1942 and 1943, which removed his rivals and promoted his own ideas. In 1943, Mao officially became chairman of the party. After World War II ended, civil war broke out again between Mao's communists and the nationalists. The Soviet Union advised Mao to make peace, but he refused, and his forces, skilled in guerrilla warfare and supported by millions of rural Chinese, kept advancing. In 1949, they captured the city of Nanjing, and on October 1, 1949, Mao stood in Beijing and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China, Adolf Hitler. After World War I, Adolf Hitler returned to Munich with no real career or education. He stayed in the army and, in 1919, was assigned to spy on a small political group called the German Workers' Party, but instead of just observing them, he joined. He was soon writing about removing Jewish people from Germany and quickly impressed the party leadership with his speaking skills. He connected with Dietrich Eckart, one of the founders, who helped shape his views and introduced him to influential people. Hitler also helped rebrand the party, renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, and choosing its now infamous swastika logo. By 1921, Hitler was drawing large crowds with speeches attacking the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ended World War I and imposed harsh terms on Germany. When internal conflict broke out in the party, he took the opportunity and threatened to quit unless he was made chairman. The party gave in, and from then on, Hitler had near-complete control over the party. He also formed a paramilitary wing, the SA or stormtroopers, to protect party meetings and intimidate opponents. Inspired by Mussolini's success in Italy, Hitler tried to stage his own coup in 1923, the Beer Hall Putsch, where he and his supporters attempted to seize power in Bavaria, but failed, and Hitler was arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served just over 1 year, and while in jail, he wrote the Mein Kampf, laying out his anti-Semitic beliefs and vision for a racially pure dictatorship that would expand eastward. After prison, Hitler promised to seek power legally. and the Nazi Party was allowed to operate again in 1925. But he was banned from public speaking in Bavaria until 1927. Meanwhile, he focused on reorganizing the party, appointing key figures like Joseph Goebbels and the Strasser brothers to expand Nazi influence in northern Germany. The turning point came with the Great Depression. In 1929, the US stock market crashed and Germany's economy collapsed. Millions were unemployed and trust in traditional parties eroded. The Nazis exploited the crisis, promising jobs, national revival, and revenge against the Versailles Treaty. By 1930, the Nazis were the second largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, but Hitler still couldn't run for office because he had just renounced Austrian citizenship in 1925. In 1932, however, he gained German citizenship and ran for president. He lost to Paul von Hindenburg, but this proved he had mass support. Despite repeated elections, no stable government could be formed, and under pressure, Hindenburg hesitantly appointed Hitler chancellor on the 30th of January 1933. It was supposed to be a partnership, but Hitler had other plans. When the Reichstag building burned down in February 1933, the Nazis blamed communists and pushed through the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed arrests without trial. The Nazis then intimidated voters and opponents before the March elections, where they increased their vote share. To fully consolidate power, Hitler pushed the Enabling Act through Parliament. It allowed him to rule by decree, and with most opposition silenced or arrested, the act passed. Germany was now a dictatorship. Soon, all other parties were banned, trade unions were dissolved, and their leaders were imprisoned. The Nazis replaced them with a single state-controlled organization. In June 1934, Hitler carried out the Night of the Long Knives, purging the SA leadership and killing several political enemies. When Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the roles of president and chancellor, becoming Führer, and the army swore loyalty to him personally. From that moment on, Hitler held total control over Germany. Don't forget to check out today's sponsor, World of Warships, using the link in the description to sign up for free on PC today. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or join my Discord to suggest another.